relation to aviation only status during the DCO process will result in legal liabilities far beyond the Council's ability to restore the parties concerned to the position they were in before the DCO started. In a nutshell, are we sure that by overturning this that we can actually backwind a process for the DCO that is already well underway, and should we be interfering with this process with this proposal this evening?
Thank you, Councillor Ashby. Councillor Taylor-Smith, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for allowing me to speak following the decision to circulate this information to members and members of the public. Personally, I would like to say I think it's very disappointing that we haven't actually been able to have this from the word go, because in my opinion this is absolutely fair that it should be in the public domain, and not only for members of the public, more importantly members of this council. We are all members of this council, whether we're actually on the planning committee or as a reserve, which I am, and I have actually attended a lot of these planning meetings, so I think it is absolutely right that all members should have access to the material. We are able to keep quiet when it's important, when it affects the council's reputation or something like that, and we would not act in an unguided and ill-advised way. Just having a very, very quick read of this information, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to draw your attention to, it's not page, there's no page number actually, but I think it's the third page under the corporate box, talking about the council what they should be doing and how to react. And it mentions the risk to the council and reputational damage. I think, unfortunately, the council has already suffered some reputational damage tonight. I think it is inevitable that the, I don't know quite what the word is really, but I shall say the mystery perhaps surrounding this particular item on the agenda tonight has caused a lot of unwarranted perhaps attention, but I do think that it is a great shame. There's little we can do much about that now, other than hopefully to have the committee members debate this extensively and obviously make a informed decision, having due regard to all of the council's advice and the monitoring officer's advice and everything else. And so that's all I'm going to say, Chairman, but I do think it's unnecessary. We've caused a lot of upset and misunderstanding within the community by not actually having this in the public domain earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. The planning officer will now outline the report.
Thank you, Chairman. The Council is due to defend the Planning Committee's objection to 4 planning applications for the change of use of existing buildings on the Manston Airport site at the planning appeal public inquiry on the 24th of January 2017. The introduction section of the report identifies a bit about the planning history, but members will be familiar as they were all sitting on the committee when the items were looked at in August, September and October last year and February this year. The Council was required to submit a proof of evidence for the public inquiry by the 23rd of December, so the end of this year, and this item is to consider the Council's position on those 4 planning appeals in relation to the new evidence from the Council's local plan process representing a change in circumstances from the decision made last year to refuse the change of use of building 870 and in February this year to recommend refusal of the non-determination appeals on the other 3 buildings. This evidence concludes that there is no reasonable prospect of an airport recommencing on the site within a reasonable time period, and the direction of the draft local plan is to designate the site for a mixed-use development which could include aviation use. This was confirmed by Cabinet to move to public consultation on the 8th of December, and the proposed changes to those draft designating the site for mixed use will be consulted on in the new year. I want to outline 4 particular issues of importance raised in the report. Firstly, the Council's opposition to these proposals was based on policy EC4 of the 2006 local plan, which reserves the land for airside development. Point 2.3 on page 9 of the report outlines the policy falls to be considered under paragraph 22 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which states the policy should avoid the long-term protection of sites allocated for employment use where there is no reasonable prospect of a site being used for that purpose, and where there is no reasonable prospect of a site being used for the allocated employment use, alternatives should be treated on their own merits.
DCO!
It is the position of officers that there is insufficient evidence to justify full weight being attributed to policy EC4, given the local plan evidence. Secondly, these appeals relate to the reuse of 4 individual buildings within the airport site, not the whole site. The future of the wider airport site is still subject to the local plan process and is the subject to an outline planning application. The proposed changes of use would not affect these processes continuing, nor would the proposals prejudice aviation uses occurring on the site. And to pick up Councillor Ashby's point,
I would kindly ask, please, members of the public to remain silent so we can listen to the officer's report. Thank you.
To pick up on Councillor Ashby's point about the DCO, that is at a pre-application stage. There is no prejudice because an application has not been submitted for a DCO. Thirdly, the officer's recommendation to the Planning Committee does not restrict third-party participation at the public inquiry, and that can include River Oak, who have registered to speak as a Rule 6 party, meaning they can give evidence at the inquiry, and this is covered in point 4.1, I think it's page 10 of the report. Fourthly, it's key for the Council to act reasonably in maintaining opposition with regards to any appeal case. The financial implications, if the Council is found to be unreasonable, are outlined in page 5 and 6 of the report, and members will be familiar with previous cases where the Council has been required to pay the costs of appellant when an award of costs have been made. Remember the Derby Arms case, where that reason for refusal was found to be unreasonable because it didn't have sufficient evidence to back it up, and the Council had to pay £11,000 on a written representations appeal just for the appellant's time in that specific instance. The report outlines that Planning Committee are recommended to withdraw the grounds of refusal in relation to the 4 appeals for the change of use of buildings in the airport site due to this new evidence and the direction of the draft local plan. The Council would therefore offer no evidence to the public inquiry except in discussion around safeguarding conditions as appropriate and offering general procedural support. If the Planning Committee were to maintain opposition to the appeals on the basis of the evidence before the Council, it's officers' opinion that the Council would be at real risk of a significant costs award being successful against the authority and reputational damage for not acting reasonably in use of its planning functions in response to the available evidence. It's therefore recommended to members that they agree option 1 at 5.1 of the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, but it's very good.
I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted, and I politely remind members that we are not discussing the legal advice. Thank you. Anybody wish to speak? Sorry. Thank you. Anybody wish to speak? Councillor Gregory.
Thank you, Chairman. Whilst I understand, can I just clarify a point? Because there are, in the white documents that have been circulated to members of the public, does that include page 10?
Not numbered.
I've got the pages, I've got mine.
Can I continue now, Chairman? It's been
Yeah, please continue.
I was being very careful because I wasn't going to say something unless I'd seen that the public had had it. I'll stick to the two options, if you like. Back in February, was it, when this council or this planning committee made a decision to refuse. It was my first time on the planning committee for my 6-month sabbatical, if you like, and fortunately I wasn't here because Councillor Rosanna Taylor-Smith covered for me. But what I will say is that we have two options before us. We have an option that seems pretty comfortable, and we have 5-2, which seems very uncomfortable. But it's not uncomfortable for the reasons that you may at first thought think. Because it says members confirm they maintain the current reasons for refusal and that a representative of the planning committee will represent the council at the public inquiry. This will require proof of evidence to be completed by the representative and to be submitted by the 23rd of December, which is what, 11 days away? On the basis of evidence to be outlined at the meeting. Officers will not be able to give professional support to this view. I think that's appalling. Because what we've got is a situation where if members of the council decided, or the planning committee decided to take that option, they would be on their own with no support representing the council. Now, I've represented this council on planning appeals in the past, one particular one that springs to mind, and I had the benefit of officer support. And I was very grateful for it, because we might be reasonably good with words, but we don't know planning law. We don't know the ins and outs of it. And I think for officers not to be able to give professional support is wrong. And I really do think that that is skewing the way members may feel the need to vote, because they may be frightened.
Councillor Gregory, if I may stop you there, Officer Livingston wishes to come back on that one.
Sorry to interrupt, I just want to clarify. It says that officers will not be able to give professional support to this view in terms of sustaining the current reasons for refusal. As Councillor Gregory indeed notes, previously councillors have represented the planning committee's view. Sometimes they go against planning officers' views. In terms of procedural support, as outlined with regards to if option 1 were to go forward and we actually would offer procedural support to the entire inquiry occurring, because it would occur here, we would obviously facilitate that and obviously be present for safeguarding conditions. In the same way, if a member of committee was to put forward a different view and have evidence to support that, and as was going to produce a proof of evidence, we would support them in carrying out that task, but we wouldn't be able to give professional support of that view at the inquiry. We wouldn't be able to give any evidence in support of that view. So it's the last part of that sentence in option 2.
Thank you, Chairman.
I'm confused.
I understand that, in which case perhaps option 2 should have been better worded. Because I really do think it was designed, and maybe I'm totally wrong, to give the impression that you'd be all on your own. And I really do think that needed better wording, so that what Mr Livingston has just said was available to all members to think, oh yes, it won't cloud my judgment by feeling under threat. But I thank you for that, and I just think that it was a point that needed to be made, because if it's left worded as it was, we would be in a position where we thought, crikey, we can only vote one way, otherwise I've got to appear in front of all these important people. And I think that is undue pressure. But it's been cleared up, and apparently it's not there. So I can't say I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation, but I'm a little less unhappy with option 2.
The officer wishes to come back.
And just to clarify, in terms of members, in terms of option 2, officers would not be able to construct reasons that go contrary to their professional view. I think that's a key point to follow up as well. It wouldn't be able to create reasons that aren't supported by our professional advice. Thank you.
Councillor Parkinson, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I just would like a point of clarity, if I may, as regards what we can discuss as regards the legal, because there is reference to legal on page 6, which I would like to make a point about.
Sorry, if you look at the pink report, don't look at the white report. Alright, if it's in the right report, then you can refer to it.
Thank you. Okay. In the report before us, in the corporate implications, it says the planning committee is not bound to follow the advice of the officers. I would like the officers and members to know I take the advice from officers very seriously, and this is what was officers' advice that was clearly laid out at our last meeting about Building 870 on the 17th of February, where we concluded that the officers' recommendation be adopted, namely, the proposed development, by virtue of the loss of the building for aviation use, would create the potential need for additional buildings within the countryside and would not constitute essential airspace development, contrary to the local plan policies CC1 and EC4 of the Thanet Local Plan, and paragraphs 14 and 17 and guidance within the National Planning Policy Framework. I repeat, that the officers' recommendation be adopted. As we all know, this motion was carried. 11 people in the committee voted for the recommendation, and there was 1 abstention, which is conclusive of the mood of the committee. In the report before us, it also mentions legal, and it is in the white document. And the monitoring officers endorses the Wensbury principle. I did want to read this out, but if you want to laugh, it is at the bottom of page 6. In a nutshell, a standard of unreasonableness used in assessing an application for judicial review of a public authority's decision. Once again, I believe we did this back in January. In the corporate element of the report on page 7, it mentions the council's reputation. The reputation is continually being damaged by the cloak and dagger approach to decisions, such as the one we're making today. However, I am pleased that the officers reconsidered their recommendation to exclude the public. The recommendations by Cabinet on the 8th of December 2016 is that the emerging local plan be agreed for public consultation in mid-January. The council, before being presented to the planning, the emerging local plan will be presented to the full council before being sent to the planning inspectorate, and eventually it will go to the Secretary of State for the final seal of approval.
Yes.
Until that point, it will still only be the emerging local plan, and all the previous policies are still viable, and therefore SP05 is still an airport until the Secretary of State determines otherwise.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
I mentioned in the Cabinet meeting last week, under the corporate overview, there is a concern that not having a well evidence-based local plan places the council at risk in terms of appeal decisions. But it seems to me the major risk has come from the council itself when it seems in a rush to change the usage of site SP05, also known as Manston Airport. If usage of the site wasn't changed, the appellants wouldn't have a case with the planning inspectorate. I would like to ask the monitoring officer if you or another official from the council requested that the planning inspectorate postpone the inquiry date in October as you were waiting more evidence. If that was the case, was this request made with the knowledge that the ABRA report would support the appellant's appeal? When supplying this evidence to the inspectorate, will you also be providing the Falcon report?
We are on tape.
Did the monitoring officer or another official, sorry, beg your pardon, I've just said that.
Nice one.
Okay. Of course, the monitoring officer could write to the planning inspectorate again and ask for another postponement until after the public consultation. As this is a public interest case, I would like to know if the monitoring officer would be prepared to do that. If the answer is yes and the monitoring officer is prepared to write to the planning inspectorate, then I would like to suggest that as a recommendation. Thank you.
The monitor officer will now address you.
Yes, I can confirm that it was me who wrote to the planning inspectorate requesting a a deferral of the hearing, and that's because the report was imminent, but no, I had no idea what the content of that report would be.
Rubbish.
We could have told you.
The officer also will address you.
You told them what to do.
I think that one of the points that I raised earlier, it is about us assessing the council's case as we go along. We have had a delay from the original request for a hearing that was made. Originally it was a hearing, it wasn't a public inquiry, when after we formed our view in February. Since then things have moved on. We've gained more evidence. We can't ignore that evidence.
What evidence?
What evidence?
And there have been multiple delays, and it's perfectly reasonable, given that we had evidence that was coming in for the local plan, for us to request a delay for consideration of that evidence. The policy framework that has to be considered is the Thanet Local Plan 2006 in terms of the current Safe Policy EC4. Now, when looking at that policy, we have to consider that against the national framework. We have to consider every single local plan policy that we have in every decision we make against the national planning policy framework. In this instance, there is no reasonable prospect from the evidence that we've got to support the view of that policy, to give full weight to that policy, and therefore it falls to be considered under paragraph 22 of the MPPF. That was outlined originally when we were talking, the actual policy or paragraph itself was outlined when we talked last year in October, that was the relevant test, and it still is the relevant test when we're looking at this proposal. And given the change in circumstance, it's considered reasonable. We have to consider the additional information, otherwise we are not being reasonable as a council. And therefore, the recommendation is in 5.1. Thank you.
But the AVA report's only one-sided.
Councillor Bainbridge, please.
Thank you, Chairman. As far as I can ascertain from reading this report, the coercion that it feels like coercion that's coming from TDC for the committee to alter its decision on refusing change of use for these airport buildings is based solely on the opinion of the AVA report. Why is it that when we have a perfectly good report from the Falcon consultancy which supports our position as a council to maintain the use of the Manston as an airport, do we commission yet another report? Especially from a consultant that is known to disagree that cargo business will remain stable if not increase in the UK, especially in the light of Brexit. That said, we have two reports contradicting each other, so basically that's a draw. Manston is an airport in the local plan and the draft hasn't gone to public consultation yet, so subsequently I can't see how we can change our mind on refusing the airport buildings being changed of use.
Is there anybody else wishing to speak?